All right, we are back at the Backstage Pass at Palantir's 5th edition of AIPCon. We got a lot to talk about. We had some keynote presentations. We're going to go over that, and in just a little bit, we're going to hear from some other customers on how they're deepening their relationship with AIP. Jack, what'd you get from those keynotes?
I mean, I barely had time to even sort of get my thoughts together on that. That was such a rapid-fire set of outcomes, of stories, and also different approaches to telling those stories, right? You had, say, Trinity that sort of had that power of 3, like $30 million of savings over 3 years from 3 months of dev time, like that. That's crazy. That's just a brilliant story in itself. Obviously, the ontology story there is great. But then you go from that end of the scale to, of course, Liz's story, like Chris telling that story deliberately from the ground up. How do people actually get started building use cases? How do they sort of connect to that broader ecosystem of ideas? I'm so excited to hear more about him and like more about his journey as part of that process, because they're building something huge at Lear.
And so much of what we've seen throughout AIPCon is really net new for our audience. And having Vice Admiral Whitworth present Project Maven, I think that was such a unique and special moment for everyone on the live stream as well in person. And it's also teeing up new experiences that we're having across the board, including the new format for the Backstage Pass.
Exactly.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about Maven as well is obviously there's a lot of confidential work that Palantir does with the US government. So to be able to actually get a little bit more of an insight, I know from the retail community, a lot of people care about the government business. So it was interesting to see how that business is evolving at the end of the day.
Definitely.
I'm sure Twitter was blowing up.
Twitter was blowing up.
Yeah, I hope you've been checking, surely.
Yeah.
I think also like playing into some of the things we talked about in our little pre-game show, that sort of engine primitive, right? We saw that up on stage with Mount Sinai, the eligibility engine. Just to go one level deeper on that, because I think it's so awesome, that sort of graph view that we saw, like we mentioned on stage, of course, just how much work would go into doing that kind of evaluation manually. But in reality, that's thousands of data points, unstructured data, patient notes, as well as structured data, vitals, and other parameters. That just one chart kind of lighting up and showing kind of red for bad, green for good. There's so much complexity behind it, and yet it's an engine that they can configure and deploy to multiple use cases.
You would say it's going beyond chat.
Oh, it's definitely, we're way beyond chat at this point. I think specifically there, you're turning like the logic of the business, the logic of their nurses, their doctors, their boots on the ground, into an engine that can run automatically across every single patient. I just think, I'm so excited to see how they scale that effort, because it's such a unique approach.
Boots on the ground, we've got boots on stage, there are boots everywhere.
Yeah, I'm still wearing the shoes. We're still wearing the shoes, that's the main thing. Speaking of boots on the ground, we've got some boots joining us this time around, haven't we?
Yeah, we've got some new people joining us as well at this halftime show, and this is an exclusive for people that are watching on the live stream. So we're going to get started with some customers and get a deeper understanding of how they're using AIP. First up, we have our first speaker from Wendy's Quality Supply Chain Co-op, Krista Pullman. QSCC provides supply chain functions for over 6,400 restaurants throughout the United States and Canada, and just 2 weeks ago, they announced a furthering of their partnership with Palantir. Let's take it over to Nat and Chris.
Thanks, Amit. Krista, welcome. We're so excited to have you here. I have a vision of you being up on that keynote stage in the near future. We're obviously, the partnership was just announced, but would love to learn about how being a data-driven organization has transformed how you operate your supply chain.
Absolutely. Well, one, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. This has been great. Keynote's been great so far. I'm learning a lot about how other people are using the Foundry system. And, you know, as far as a data-driven organization, as a supply chain, data is paramount. And we've always been a data-driven organization, but that data has never been really connected in the most meaningful way to drive the right outcome. And as we started our journey, Palantir was really the one company of several that we talked to that were able to get us over the hump of worrying about our data wasn't perfect, and worrying about we didn't have all the data that we thought we needed, and really, you know, convinced us that, you know, you're running this operation, you're running it pretty well, but you have ideas that you can't unlock because it's not your data's not connected in the fashion that drives the right action at the right time. And so in very short order, in a pilot we did last fall, we were able to see, you know, how fast the builds were, how much we actually knew about what we wanted, because we were also, you know, considering maybe we don't know what we need.
Exactly.
But as we got into it, really were excited about how we were able to encode the tribal knowledge of folks like myself and a few others that have been around the organization for 10, 20 years, to help make our newer employees more efficient and more able to take action sooner in like their training life cycle. And so, like the example I like to share is, we had an intern that joined us for only 3 months over this summer, no background in supply chain, was able to get into our platform and actually make decisions.
Right.
And it's because we're guiding the user to the problem, and it's kind of like what some of our keynote speakers talked about. There's still a person that needs to make a decision, but we're getting rid of the noise, and like I put the shovel down for digging for a problem, the problem's here, what do you want to do about it? And that's really where we want to spend our time training our associates.
Absolutely, and as a newer customer as well, you mentioned getting started with the pilot. How do you even begin to think about where to begin with a partnership with Palantir? Where do you even start?
It was really close in about like how do we become more efficient
Right.
On what we do. We get stuff from A to B, right? And we try to get it there, don't run out, don't have too much, get it there for a most competitive price,
Sure.
right? That's the simplistic way that you can talk about supply chain. But what we've learned over time, it wasn't where we started, but the team kept telling us you're going to find things that you didn't expect, and it's so true. And we found that we're able to drive value to our restaurant operators in a way that we didn't expect. And so we believe that's things like automating restaurant ordering, automating inventory, variance benchmarking, like how much waste do I have versus what I should. It's really going to drive the profitability and ultimately help us grow this wonderful brand that Dave Thomas started in 1969. That's our end goal.
Krista, thank you so much. I can't wait to see what we do next together, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Nat. Thanks, Krista, for making sure these chicken nuggets can officially make their way into my stomach. Next up, we're joined by Chris Simpson, who is a director at Lear. Now, Lear's AIP journey originally began at a boot camp in Detroit. Our very own Jack Dobson was at that boot camp, and now Foundry is rolling out to thousands of users in the company. Let's go to Jack and let's go to Chris and Jack.
Thank you so much, Amit. Appreciate it, Chris. Great to have you back here, and first time on the keynote stage, of course. I mean, as I mentioned at the very top, your story is fascinating in the difference in angle you took, right? Rather than showing kind of the end state of which you guys have a ton of like high-scale global workflows, you're talking about that builder story, those boots on the ground. How do those ideas kind of start? How do you build on them? How do you end up turning them into a deployable product? I guess I'm just curious to go that one level deeper. Like, what are some of the stories, or maybe even some of the personas that you've seen, like, pick this up like you never expected? People on the factory floor, where else?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the example that we gave was a real example, right? Notional data, all that stuff, but that is a real example where we had somebody on the shop floor that was like, surely, they went through one of our presentations and they're like, surely there has to be a better way.
Yep.
And a lot of the time too, I wanted to try and take an example of saying, it doesn't have to be a 500 ontology object backed application. It can be as simple as one object, one action, one workshop app to be able to go through and drive value. And really a lot of those use cases are the ones that end up being some of the most impactful
100%.
Because they're the ones that are like, no, this is a problem that I have to deal with every day, day in and day out, whether it's on the shop floor, in the back office, anywhere in the business around the world. We have these type of problems that now Foundry allows for us to do something beyond Excel, right? And really allows for us to have the horsepower to deliver applications that scale across the business without having to necessarily have all of the infrastructure and weight that sits behind them.
That's incredible. And along with what you're saying, every idea has to start somewhere, right?
Yes.
So the thing I love about Lear, and I sort of learned more about in building this story with you, was the fact that you've sort of abstracted the process of actually identifying these ideas, kind of collating these use case requests from the business, and then you basically manage the approval, the deployment, and then the value sort of orientation, the value measurement, all within Lear's ontology, right? You've actually built that out as a workflow in of itself. So tell me more about that process. How did that idea come about?
Yeah, like you said, we kind of use the ontology to manage the ontology, so it's a little bit meta in that regard. But one of the things that we have, again, with all of that scale, how do we go through and also still balance the governance aspect of it with being a publicly traded company and all that sort of things? How do we go through and balance that scale with the ability to still allow for people to build in the platform? So we ended up using a workshop app to go through and build a use case submission and approval system that allows for us to be able to capture those ideas, be able to actually give a little bit more specific in terms of, okay, what is the function, what's the area of the business, what's the value that we see, are you going to try and hire somebody to help you with it, are you going to go through and deliver it yourself like the one that we saw? All of that type of thing inside of the platform itself. And what that does is it then allows for us to take that use case object and actually then tie it to what are the data sources that this is actually helping to support, what are the workshop apps, what are all the different functions, And what that allows for us to do is when we get new users that join the platform, they're able to go through and say, okay, what do I have for my plan? What are the use cases that already exist? What are the data sources, all that sort of thing? And having this all inside of the ontology makes it a very smooth process for them to be able to pick it up and run with it.
That's incredible. A great example of turning the ontology inward to look at your own operations, right?
Exactly.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet.
Excited to hear
Thank
more
you.
later on today.
You bet. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris and Jack. Next up is LifePoint. I'm joined here with Christy Lightsey, the Director of Therapy Services and Wound Care at Trios LifePoint. So, Christy, you're very unique in that before you went into healthcare leadership, you spent over a decade as a clinical speech language pathologist.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit more insight on how AIP is making LifePoint a more data-driven
Sure,
company?
yeah. So at LifePoint, we have several values, but two of our values are really championing patient care and making a difference together. And so what has come about out of that is we created, through Foundry, a program called Valinor that really focuses on therapy services in the hospital. So physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. And what started out as a bunch of Post-it notes on my desk has created a scheduling system, an AI note-taking system, and actually an AIP system that looks at patients as they come in and flags them for needing therapy. So that's what we've created.
When did you see those workflows actually making a difference inside the company?
Yeah, so we beta tested it, of course, right, to begin with. But then when we pushed it into the hospital, we knew within actually the first week, because scheduling all of our patients was taking, between all three of those disciplines, was taking upwards anywhere from 92 minutes to 3 hours, depending on patient caseload. And so what happened is now we run that report and it takes 2 minutes, 37 seconds, depending on how many patients are on it.
Okay, so obviously that's a big transformation.
Right, yeah.
The goal of the healthcare company ultimately is to serve patients. So how important has this been for those patients at LifePoint?
So the rollout of Valinor has been epic in proportion, in the sense that we are able to see more patients now, which is really going back to that championing patient care, right? But we're doing it with the same amount of FTEs that we were doing it before. So on average at Trios in my hospital, since the rollout of Valinor and AIP, we're seeing on average 10 to 12 more patients a day than we were before just because of it.
Do you have any advice for people beginning their journey to become a data-driven healthcare company?
Yeah, I think that you look at the problem, right? And what is the problem that we need to solve? And then you really talk to your frontline workers, and that's what made it unique for us, is I had that experience as a frontline worker.
Where do you see Foundry taking healthcare over the next decade?
Oh man, you know, that's something that I sit up in bed at night and I think, what could we do next? And I have some ideas. I think one of them could be looking at hack harms. And what that is when a patient comes in, we look at their H&P, so their history. And we say, okay, are they at risk for wounds, pressure injuries? Are they at risk for aspiration pneumonia? And so, of course, I think of it from a therapeutic mindset. So from that therapeutic mindset, could we take that data and then make a deliverable on what do we order next?
Right.
And we're already seeing that happen. I just would like to push it further. I think we can push the envelope, right?
And so you think the sort of predictive simulations you can do based on the aggregate data that you're compiling, that could be something transformational over the next decade for different use cases?
Yeah, I think it could be absolutely transformational. What we haven't talked about is that actually, as a part of Valinor, we can actually write evaluation notes in it. So we created a checkbox system where therapists go in and they check the boxes, right, of what they're seeing in their evaluation. But then what it allows us to do is it allows us to hit a button and the AI writes the note for us. That's not taking the provider out of it. It's providing a basis to write their note to.
Right.
So they can go back in and add what needs to be added, they can take away, but that AI gets smarter the more and more we use it. So what we're seeing is an evaluation that was taking 45 minutes to evaluate and to treat, now we can do an evaluation in 30 minutes and the evaluation note takes maybe a minute and a half.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Thank you,
Incredibly
Christy.
impressive.
That was awesome.
And before you hop away, we here at Palantir are very proud of the work that you've been doing with Valinor, and we feel like you're a part of the family. And all of our internal teams have flags.
Oh my gosh!
Wow, look at this!
This is amazing! Thank you so much. Thank you guys. Have a nice
that's
day.
beautiful.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christy.
All right, next up we have Eaton, and we're joined by Pete Green, a director of enterprise data assets at the company. Now, Eaton just signed an expanded partnership with Palantir after months based on the diversity of use cases they saw and that they've been able to do with AIP. They were also at the first ever AIP Bootcamp in Chicago. Let's take it over to Nat and Pete to learn more.
Well, thanks, Amit, but I don't want to say they were the first part of the AIP Bootcamp, but Pete was actually there, and so was Jack. So, we've got a little bit of a reunion happening here at the halftime show. Pete, if you could tell us a little bit more about how AI is being brought into production at Eaton and how you're using the bootcamp model to do it.
Well, that's a great question. So, first off, start with the bootcamp model. The great thing about the bootcamp is it really kickstarts new ideas, and you can imagine when you introduce artificial intelligence or generative AI into your corporation, you're going to have hundreds of ideas, and you're going to have hundreds of projects that people would like to look at. But what the bootcamp really allows us to do is take an idea and get everybody co-located for 2 or 3 days and have a hackathon, and at the end of 3 days, you pretty much know whether that product's going to work or not. And then once you decide if it's a good product and it's going to work, then you can expand it on to move into production. I think the expansion of AI has been really exciting. We were partnering with Palantir before AI was in the Foundry platform, and that's really, we learned most about it at that first boot camp. And what I really see the power of Palantir, and this is what I always tell other customers, is there's two parts of being good at building these future-looking projects, and one of them is getting the data ingested and connecting the data. So that was great, and now introduce generative AI, and now all inside of the Palantir platform, you have the connected data, which we refer to as the ontology, and now you can layer in multi-tiered large language models that can help you summarize your data and really produce some intuition that human beings just could not get to. So it's really exciting for us.
And how has your perspective changed, thinking back to where you were with that first AIP bootcamp to where you are today?
Yeah, well, I think we learned a lot. I think what companies will see is the more you build out your ontology, probably the better off you're going to be. You also run into some challenges with, again, once you start introducing the artificial intelligence, the projects get more exciting, and people get more excited, and the benefits get bigger. And so then those hundreds of great ideas turn into multi-hundreds of great ideas. And it's all just really a good story. I think we have a lot of confidence. I think we realize that we're going to need to scale with these projects. So not only our Eaton team, our partnership with Palantir, it's just really a win-win for everybody.
Absolutely. Oh,
Okay, on. I was going to say, I think there's a story there which I find fascinating around, like, as you sort of build your intuition, as you mentioned, around the platform, around the capabilities of these underlying models, you sort of start redefining your ambition almost, like yours personally and also your teams. They start to rethink, oh, things that I thought weren't possible or would be too complex, maybe they are actually possible.
Yeah.
So are there some of those examples where, like, things that were never even on Eaton's radar are now ideas that you're maybe exploring next?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, the power of AI and Palantir is, before it was really difficult to get these in the hands of the users. Now you can build all of these tools inside of Palantir, and then you can distribute it inside of Palantir using the user interface, and now everyone has access to it, and you can really make a big impact where, prior to that, it would be tough to roll these larger projects out.
Yeah, sort of democratizing that capability.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Pete, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure being here. This conference
thank you for
was
joining us.
fantastic.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Finally, we have Jennifer Penrose, who is a data science manager for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Now, NCMEC's mission is incredibly important, and it speaks to the depth of technology integrating with a mission-driven culture to create a human-first process. They've been working with Palantir for a while, but their work with Palantir's AIP is actually being made public right here, right now at the Backstage Pass. Let's take it over to Jack and Jen for more details.
Thank you, Amit. Jen, great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, this is such a critical use case, right? This is a very sensitive working environment. The subject matter is extremely sensitive, and every decision is obviously mission critical, right? I think we talk a lot about human AI teaming, but this is probably the paramount example where enabling your people with that tooling can really make a real tangible difference to many people's lives, many children's lives. So tell me more about the work you're doing, the incredible work your teams are doing, and then how is it being supported by this tooling?
Well, thank you so much for having me. NCMEC serves as the nation's largest child protection organization, and we are a national and global clearinghouse for reports of crimes against children. In 2023 alone, we received more than 36 million reports of suspected child sexual exploitation occurring online. These reports come in from the general public as well as companies, and we receive reports from all over the world. So as you can imagine, with such a high volume of incoming reports, we have to leverage data and technology to keep up with that daily influx. And that's really where Foundry and AIP come in. They help us to prioritize, triage, and process these reports. So to take one very specific example, in recent years we've seen a dramatic increase in reports to our cyber tip line of financial sextortion of children, suspected financial sextortion. So these are cases where an offender is making demands for payment from a child and threatening to release publicly sexual or explicit images of that child. These reports are time sensitive and urgent, and AIP can actually identify these reports as they're coming in and then help analysts prioritize them based on the risk factors found in those reports and the specific details.
That's incredible. And I imagine just even in that example you're describing there, this is a classic example where all the nuances and the subjectivity of the data you're working with and the nature of this use case as a whole, like they can really make a difference, right, in terms of the optimal decision to make and how to actually handle these very sensitive situations. So specifically with the kind of the tooling that your people are using, I imagine having that visibility, having traceability as to kind of how information is being passed, how that's feeding into a decision, that's pretty critical, right, in terms of actually understanding, are we making the right choice here?
Absolutely. We really think of AIP as essentially an assistant to our analysts. It's surfacing the critical details and data insights that they need with that visibility to exactly where in the report different information is found. And that then frees up analyst time so that they can focus on what they do best, on the areas where their human judgment, their expertise, their insights add that most crucial value.
100%. I think you said it best. Focus on what they do best. Honestly, the work your team are doing is absolutely incredible. It's an honor, it's a privilege to be able to actually support that from a technical perspective. And yeah, very exciting to see what comes next.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're so grateful to this long-standing partnership with Palantir. It really enables this work, and it would not be possible without these tools.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Jen. All right, in just a little bit, we will have the second half of customer keynotes for today. Going to do a little bit of a preview of that. What can we expect?
I think, honestly, it's crazy that we're only halfway through the keynotes, right? I think we're going to continue to see that engine primitive I was mentioning, like some of the stuff that was teased in the first half. You're going to see those same primitives come out, but used for a very different outcome, solving very different problems. So maybe you could start thinking about, okay, if I look at sort of the archetype on show there, maybe even if I'm not in the healthcare world, maybe that's something that could be reapplied, right?
Right.
So I think that's one piece, and then I think there's another thing, and it's going to be with Komatsu's demo, which I'm really excited to see. They've been putting a ton of work into really leveling up their workflows, and I think it's a great example of literally going through what we as Palantir often refer to as the levels of AI deployment. They started with the sort of AI assistant type archetype, like maybe they had kind of a chat-based interface, then it was proactively suggesting, hey, maybe you could change this, maybe you could change that. But specifically what we're going to see a glimpse of in their demo is moving to that agent-oriented workflow, where now not even kind of waiting, you don't need to wait for a human input. Instead, these agents are working autonomously behind the scenes, running scenarios, testing different parameters as input to their tooling within their logic, and then actually pushing the recommendations to the user to approve and reject. And of course, all of that fed by an ongoing feedback loop to improve those suggestions. So that level of technical proficiency has just gone like crazy. They were also one of those first boot camps. Very excited to see what they have in store.
And on my part, a lot of what we talk about is speed to value. And I think Tampa General really encapsulates that.
100%.
I don't want to spoil too much, especially for folks. It's so hard not to when talking about these keynotes because the work that they're doing is so exciting. I'll let them spoil it themselves, but the window of when a former solution was being sunset to when they were able to bring in Palantir was so tight, and it had to be perfect. If you're thinking about Tampa General, the users at the end of that are patient. And so these are real life effects on someone's life. And so that is critical work that is happening, and the work that we did with them had to be perfect at the start. There's no room for error. So you think about pressure scenarios, and you think about that time to value, that's something that's such a critical component, and I think people are going to be really impressed and really excited about the work that they've been doing.
100%, 100%.
Yeah, and throughout the rest of the day, I'm going to be doing more customer interviews and going to all these demo sessions. I think there's just so much happening. As Dr. Karp said, there's over 100 organizations showing different use cases for AIP.
Crazy.
Is that all?
Is that all?
Yeah, it's like, we got to go bigger, surely.
What is the energy like to you guys? This is like, at this point, your fourth AI. You guys have been to most of the
Fifth AIP
cons for you guys. This is my second one. What's the energy like being here?
I mean, I think the energy is palpable, firstly. Like, even just kind of seeing all these conversations happening in this room alone, and literally as I say that, I get told to stop. There you go. Probably a good shout. But the great thing is those conversations are going to continue. I think the thing that I really want to call out in terms of the sort of mixture of energies here, at our demo expo that's happening this afternoon, we've got customers that have been working with us for the equivalent of basically 10 minutes, like some of our freshest newing customers using the latest of product. But also, literally one station over, you'll have a customer like BP who's been working with us for 10 years. To have kind of both ends of the timeline, and that's a timeline that will continue long into the future, both like two very different stages of partnership, to have them sort of demoing to each other, sharing ideas.
It's exciting.
I just think that's such a fascinating combination of energy.
And I will say, just to build off that, the customer interactions that happen on site at AIPCon cannot be replicated in any other setting.
Not at all.
This is the critical place where people are able to get ideas about workflows that are applicable to their business use cases that they cannot get anywhere else. I mean, I think Meet the Masters, screen sharing, every single conversation that's happening is with someone that they may never have spoken to before.
100%.
And that, to me, is incredibly special.
Yeah, and I feel that myself. I met customers that were here for 10 years yesterday. I met customers that signed literally 10 months ago. And so the diversity of customers that are here is very exciting. We've got a lot more to go for Palantir's AIPCon. That's it for myself, Jack, and Natalie. But we have more keynotes coming up, and we'll have a lot more behind-the-scenes footage coming later today.
Let's go.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.